Welcome back. Our next two panels cover satellite operations and manufacturers. We will start with the manufacturers who build satellites to multiple specifications and requirements. We are fortunate to have as our moderator, the editor of Space News, Mr. Warren Forster.
Thanks, Laura. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Satellite Manufacturers Panel, which is the first of two I'll be moderating this morning. So I'd like to thank the Space Foundation for putting on the conference and for giving me this opportunity. It goes without saying that these are challenging times for the entire space industry, but I think it's fair to say that from a budgeting perspective, things could be worse. The major DoD space programs, for example, are largely preserved in the 2013 budget request. The satellite manufacturers represented on this panel, with the possible exception of Boeing and Lockheed Martin, tend to serve different market niches, so I think that's good because they might offer some different perspectives on their business and where it's headed. I'll go ahead and introduce them now. To my immediate left is David Bernstein. He's the Senior Vice President, Program Management at Space Systems Loral. He's sitting in for John Shelley, who could not be here today. To his left is Craig Kooning, Vice President and General Manager of Boeing Space and Intelligence Systems. Next is Fred Doyle, Vice President and Corporate Lead Executive for the Defense and Intelligence Community at Ball Aerospace and Technologies Corporation. To his left is Jeffrey Grant, I hope. Yes. Jeffrey Grant, Sector Vice President and General Manager for Space Systems, Northrop Grumman Aerospace Systems. And finally, Mark Valerio, Vice President and General Manager, Surveillance and Navigation at Lockheed Martin Space Systems. We do not have a lot of time, so I'm going to dispense with opening statements from the panelists and go right into Q&A. As always, I'll try to save a few minutes at the end for questions from the audience. With that, I think I'm going to get right to it. Gentlemen, I want to start off by kind of taking the pulse of the industry at this point. As I've said, there seems to be, these are challenging budgetary times. There's a lot of angst out there in the industry about where things are headed. So I wondered if we could just go straight down the line here and get your sense of how you feel about your business currently and how you see things evolving in the next 5 years or so. So we'll start with you, Dave.
Thank you, Warren. I want to thank the Space Foundation for inviting us, and John Shelley sends his regrets for not being able to make it. In terms of our business is pretty solid. We're primarily in the commercial, although we also do some government programs and a growing number of government programs. But for the commercial business, we've been running a backlog of roughly 22 satellites for the past several years, and we see that sustaining into the future. And the marketplace looks pretty good for commercial. We see 2012 as being a strong year, and we see modest growth over the next 4 to 5 years.
Thanks. Craig?
I'd also like to thank the Space Foundation. A great event here. Talking a little bit about our business, we too see the change in the decline in the defense business, but within our business, we've been able to make up for a lot of that with our commercial business. If you dial back about 3 years ago, our commercial business is about 10% of our revenue. Now, our commercial business is about 25% of our revenue. We have 27 satellites in backlog. One of the things that we see out of the decline in defense budget is opportunities. And those opportunities have come to us in the area of hosted payloads on our commercial spacecraft that we build. So again, the government market may be declining, but we see opportunities out there in the commercial market as well.
Okay, now how about you, Fred? You're primarily a government shop. So do you have well, I know you do some commercial satellites, but do you have a different perspective?
No, I don't think so, Warren. We're actually very confident of where we are right now in terms of our business opportunities. We have a number of very successful missions on orbit that we've just recently launched, including Kepler, SBSS, Worldview, and the Suomi NPP satellite. So we're making strides in each of those mission areas. We also have a number of programs in development right now. 5 years is probably too far to look out to say, do we have an accurate forecast? But where we are right now, we're very confident with the business opportunities we see.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, thank you, Warren. At Northrop, we're seeing a pretty flat market over the next 5 years. I characterize Many of the last years is a time of a number of initiatives begun with transformational space initiatives that did not get started. And so we're in a mode now where we've been through large development cycles and are entering what I'd call a manufacturing phase, a production phase, with a focus on affordability and manufacturing efficiencies.
Thanks. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Warren. At Space Systems Company, we have a very diverse portfolio from classified satellites to commercial satellites and strategic missile defense, everything from the size of a college dorm room refrigerator to a school bus. So that diverse portfolio, helps quite a bit to level load our workforce. We see in some of the areas some follow-on satellites coming that we're talking about right now. And again, like most of us, all really driving for how do we be most efficient and drive the cost down of our satellites, be more affordable for our customers.
So everybody seems to be pretty optimistic here, despite this sense of doom and gloom. So I'll kind of ratchet up the stakes a little bit here. Sequestration. It seems to be a growing concern as we march inexorably toward 2013. What can industry do to prepare itself for that? Let's hope, obviously, it doesn't happen, because I think, by all accounts, it's a disaster. But what can industry do to prepare for that? Let me start off with Craig on that one.
Okay. Well, again, Warren, nobody wants sequestration to happen, and I think the concern we have is actually how is it implemented. If it's just a 10 or a 20% cut across the board, again, that's probably not the best way to handle it. If it's a vertical cut, obviously it will hurt, certain manufacturers more than it would hurt those that don't get the cut. We believe that ultimately sanity will creep back into the process, and we're working with our government counterparts as to what the implications of sequestration would be. But again, we're hoping that it doesn't happen.
Anybody else want to chime in on that? How about you, Jeffrey?
I'm sorry, Warren, we're having a hard time. Oh, sequestration.
Yes.
Prepare.
Yeah, we would foresee a very negative consequence of sequestration. Just the mechanics of programs slowing down, stopping, restarting would just add stunning inefficiencies to the process if that were to actually happen.
And Fred, you look like...
Yeah, I do. The one thing that we're doing, since it's hard to know the specific impacts of that, we're trying to make it very personal here in Colorado. And so we are engaging our representatives, the Colorado delegation, so that they know how many jobs are tied up on the current programs and what the potential impacts are. And drive it home that it's not just the companies, but it's the employees and the voters that are going to suffer with this. And we're trying to make it personal.
Okay. Anybody else on that? Or
So, while we're primarily commercial, we're not going to see it in our programs. But we all use the same supplier base. And as sequestration starts to affect our colleagues who are primarily focused on government programs or more focused on government programs than we are, we're probably ultimately going to start to see some fallout in the supplier base. It won't be right away, but it'll probably be in a couple of years down the road. And that's something that we're going to want to keep an eye on as this goes forward.
That's
it does have a potential impact on us too.
Okay, and that's an interesting point that you raised, because we're already hearing some rumblings about some supplier-based issues out there. I believe you've had some issues, Mark, with the GPS-3 program with your suppliers. Could you kind of take us through what's happening there?
Could you repeat that? It would really...
GPS-3 suppliers.
Yeah, at Space Systems Company, we have about 60% of our products are procured. And I think one of the benefits of GPS is the opportunity for a large quantity of satellites, and to be able to really level load our factories as well as the factories of our supply base gets us a great opportunity for economies of scale, be able to drive the prices down, more efficiency across our supply base, just like most of us will talk about when you have large quantities. A big benefit to having more than one satellite at a time, and so GPS affords that opportunity.
But haven't you run into some issues, some supplier issues on this program, kind of driven up costs a little bit?
Yeah, one of the things with GPS, which I think is a fantastic way the Air Force has laid out this program, is a back-to-basics approach. Part of that is enhanced testing of our parts. Part of it is enhanced testing of some of the components, subsystems, and a real back-to-basics systems engineering approach. And that is, although up front has been a little difficult with some of the parts because some of the suppliers don't want to provide parts to all this additional testing. You know, they've helped us out, and they've continued to do that, provided those parts, and that'll pay big dividends later on as we get through integration testing and launching of the satellites. We won't see some of the problems that other programs may have had with, you know, late discovery of parts because we're driving all that out right now. We're seeing at least a 60% reduction in cycle time from engineering development unit to the first qual unit to the flight units, and so the investment on the back-to-basics approach and the way the Air Force laid it out is paying huge dividends. We'll be able to drive the production vehicle prices way down because of it.
Thanks. Anybody else here want to chime in on the supplier base issues? Anybody have any issues that you've run into? Or?
Warren, if I could talk just a little bit about WGS. Last year, under the leadership of Mr. Van Buren and General Palikowski, we were able to go to more commercial terms for wideband global SATCOM satellite. That also included the type of testing that our suppliers did, which were more aligned with what the commercial marketplace looked like. Because of that, one, we think it makes the supplier base more robust instead of having these specialty parts that have tons of additional testing that have proven in this case in a satellite that is in production now that we can back away from that a little bit. The Air Force has seen as a result of that about a $50 million per satellite decrease in the overall price. And so I think, as Mark mentioned, the Air Force working the programs the way they have been working are trying to take advantage of the changing time, moving more and more into production. GPS drives affordability just because of the volume, but going more and more to tying the government programs to what's happening in the commercial marketplace serves as a buffer to some of the activities that are going on with the reduced budgets.
Now, there's a lot of similarities between the WGS satellites and some of the commercial platforms that you build. Are you able at this point to synchronize your purchases of components, in other words, order in bulk and just pluck for the WGS program, pluck for this commercial program? Is that possible?
Yes, and that's exactly what we're doing. And the fact that we can do the same testing on those parts, both government and commercial, has allowed us to do that. And we see substantial lot discounts of 20 to 30% when we can go out and buy those lots with the same test procedures.
Thanks. One of the things about the DoD budget is while it largely preserves the big programs of record, what seems to be missing is research and development, the kind of research and development that keeps industry skills sharp, allows you guys to retain your best engineers, and that sort of thing, and it's also pretty profitable work. How are you dealing with the fact, what are the implications of this sort of dearth of R&D money, and how are you dealing with that? Let's start with, well, how about you, Jeffrey, because you've in particular, there's the Advanced EHF program. They pulled some money out of the 2013 budget that was supposed to go toward upgrades to AEHF.
Warren, yeah, we for many years have built just some of the leading space communication systems, and so the engineers and scientists that have been responsible for these decades of really extraordinary protected comm capabilities are steeped in technology, and both in the hardware, the software, and design techniques. With Advanced EHF and entering a production phase now, and the TSAT program having been canceled, we're entering a phase where the new challenges to this engineering base is dwindling. Now, it's sort of ironic that this occurs at a time when the demand for reliable communications is rising, and I believe the threats to our communication systems by our adversaries are rising. So what we've done to try to accommodate, keeping that workforce available for future capabilities is to move them into adjacencies. We've been very successful building the Enhanced Polar satellite communication payload, And we've moved people into terminal business areas. And we've got an initiative now to put conformal arrays on the B2 program that will communicate with the Advanced CHF program. So by finding adjacencies for this skill set, we've been successful at maintaining that technology foundation. But if we're not successful in the future, if these programs aren't continued, then we do risk losing these really demanding technical skills to other industries and would suffer a real learning curve coming back in the future.
Thanks. Now, Mark, that's affecting the GPS 3 program as well, as they've done away with sort of the block upgrade strategy in favor of what appears to be a more incremental approach. What are the impacts there on that program?
Well, I think actually it's a much better plan because instead of having capability inserted at a certain point, you now insert capability when it's actually ready. Some of the issues that we've had across the industry is trying to implement technology before it was actually ready. And in this case, I think it's a much better plan because an example of providing dual launch, we're able to actually do that earlier. Right? So we're looking to do that on vehicle 5 as opposed to vehicle 9. So we actually, when it's ready, we can do it. There are really two different types of capability insertion. One, to add more capability. The other is to drive down the cost of the satellites. And with the dual launch, that's driving it down. So we actually agree with it. We appreciate it, and we think it's the right way to go.
Wait, let me follow up quickly on the dual launch question. Obviously, we need to develop some capability to do the dual launch. I guess there's the 2-satellite adapter for the Atlas V vehicle. Is that under the GPS 3 budget, or is that in the EELV budget? Do you know?
I'm not really sure what budget line it's in. It's in the, I believe it's in the, we're doing studies right now as well as ULA, and we've proved the capability and the feasibility of doing that. The industry's been doing dual launches for three or four decades, so it's not anything new, really. We just have to work through the details of it. Certainly feasible to do. I'm not sure where it fits in the budget. We're doing studies right now for the Air Force as well as ULA.
Thanks. Now, Fred, you're in a bit of a different position from some of the others. You kind of play in a lot of the niche areas that are challenged right now. For example, operationally responsive space, space test program. Those programs, if the 2013 budget proposal goes through, those programs go away. How does that affect Ball, and how does Ball address that?
Specifically answering the question, the space test program, we do have an active contract with them for the standard interface vehicle and have been very successful with that. We have one on orbit. We have one being built right now, assembled in the factory. And we're working very closely with them on trying to understand how they plan to transition that into the programs of record. If you listen to General Polakowski and General Shelton, they talk about being more responsive in the big programs, and we're looking at how we can support that. Separate from that, though, we actually saw the trend coming a couple of years ago. And so where we made a concerted effort was to get close to the customers who actually do have some of those R&D dollars. And so we're very engaged with DARPA. We've built a very strong relationship with IARPA. We do a lot of work with AFRL and the national labs. And one of the things about the national labs is they look for transition partners. And we think based on some of the technology areas that we specialize in, we're able to do that for them. So we do have a number of ongoing activities there that are feeding that R&D part of the process from the organizations that are still focused on that.
Thanks. Now David, as a primarily commercial play, you don't have big government programs that you're able to piggyback on. What's your approach to research and development?
So as a commercial contractor, we're pretty much on our own for research and development, and we constantly are looking forward as to where's the commercial marketplace going, what do we have to have in place, and then we plow back our own profits back into ourselves and incrementally improve our satellites over time. As a commercial manufacturer, we're producing a significant number of satellites a year. We typically look at around 7 or 8 spacecraft a year. So we've got a lot of opportunity to kind of take a lot of small steps and incrementally improve performance so that year over year you start to see improvements, performance improvements. But it's got to be a lot of baby steps.
Warren, if I could
Sure.
add something in as well. I think one of the challenges for industry, though, is in discussions that we've had with leadership at SMC. SMC has a budget line that's spacecraft modernization initiatives, and it's not real large as far as the amount of money that's in there, but it's really there to look at some of the technology for the future and how can we move from some fairly expensive systems that are out there now to more cost-effective ones. So the challenge for industry is to figure out how we can lower our recurring cost of our satellites in order to create more headroom for the spacecraft modernization initiative, so these sort of R&D type programs could be sponsored for the future. The impact on Boeing, for example, on the TSAT program, during the heydays of TSAT, we probably had 30 digital ASIC design engineers. Today we have 2 or 3. And that is a sort of technology that the government's going to need in the future, and there has to be some sort of funding line in order to sustain that. So I think it really is a two-way street. Industry needs to work hard to pull down the recurring cost of satellites to create the headroom for more R&D. There's only so much money that's going to come to space.
Thanks. We hear talk of consolidation among satellite manufacturers from time to time, both on the commercial and the government side. And we're starting to hear that a little bit more with given the budget outlook. Does anybody have any thoughts on whether consolidation is inevitable or desirable? And I'll start with you on that one, Craig.
So we're not in discussion with anybody regarding any sort of consolidation. We see the opportunities out there in the marketplace, particularly between the government and the commercial, being able to support where we are right now. And so we're comfortable with that position.
David? Not that you would be involved in any discussion.
Why would you say that? Let's see. There's been a lot in the press about us recently. Our corporate parents have stated that there are strategic alternatives that are being looked at right now. This is not the first time it's happened. It's happened a number of times in the past. I'm sure it's going to continue to happen. And we'll see where Loral Space and Communications, our corporate parent, decides where to go on it. But in the short term and day-to-day basis, we're moving ahead and keeping our business strong. And I'm assuming as long as we keep it strong, people are going to keep knocking on our door from time to time.
Jeffrey, do you have any thoughts on consolidation?
Yeah, Warren, I would just point out that one of the reasons to consolidate is to make more efficient use of the capital investments. We're a very capital-intensive industry with all of our test and integration facilities and the like. And here of late, one thing I've seen us doing is using each other's facilities more often, to try to use them more efficiently across industry, and that includes our use of government facilities and the government use of our facilities and other contractors using facilities to try to operate as efficiently as we can in these challenges of affordability. And so one of the reasons that you might want to consolidate is to drive that, but I'm encouraged to see it happening now.
Anybody else? Mark.
Yeah, Warren, I'd like to look at history and see if we can inform anything about present or the future. And if you go back into the 90s, all the conditions that exist today that existed in the 90s after the Last Supper. There's very few programs that are out there. There's more capacity than programs that exist. And so, to what Jeff was saying, I think a lot of that, it's going to happen. At what level it happens, who knows? But all the conditions are where it was in the 90s. And I think back to your earlier question about critical skills, there's a report that came out in May of 2003, the Defense Science Report. I know Jeff and I were both interviewed for it, probably other panel members were. There's a lot of findings and recommendations at that time in that report about some of the programs that were having issues, as they were all basically in development, transition they called it. I recommend folks go back and read that report because it's, we're having the same conditions today, and I worry about that we're going to repeat some of those same items that we did back in the 90s.
Fred, any thoughts there? Or?
The only thing I'll say is that we do a lot of work with 3 out of the 4 companies represented here and provide valuable services and products to them. And so we watch that. We're not involved in any active discussions anywhere there. And as we look at it, the way we like to approach it is there is a risk that the small will get eaten by the big, but we like to think of it more as the fast will eat the slow. And so as we engage with everybody, we try to stay very fast and agile. And I do have one announcement on this subject that last night at the AGI Casino Night, Ball Aerospace won Northrop Grumman at the craps table in the bet.
Okay.
We'll be starting that integration next week.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I love when news gets made at these panels. Got a question in here from the audience, and I'd like to encourage you all to start getting your questions in because we're going to run out of time before you know it. This one, sequestration would be bad, but ITAR policies go beyond the law's intent, maybe worse. How are they harming the panel members today? Let's go with the two guys with the biggest stake in the commercial market here on this one. So David and then Craig.
ITAR has been something we've been living with for the past, about 14 years or so now. And it's a daily issue for us. We've learned how to deal with it, and we deal fairly effectively with it. It hasn't, for the most part, it hasn't affected our business very much at all. There are some extra things we need to do to make sure that we meet all the requirements of the law, but beyond that, it's just a part of doing business, and we take it in stride and move forward with it. That said, we'd love to see it changed and see satellites moved back to commerce, where the regime is quite a bit easier to deal with.
Greg.
So I agree with Dave. I think, for the most part, we know how to deal with it. We work with it. I think the recent strides by the Obama administration to take satellites off the munition list is a step in the right direction.
Thank you.
The one thing we have seen in some of the commercial satellite competitions where there's more technical insight demanded by the customer, that sometimes the ITAR restrictions get in our way. And it makes it a little more difficult when they need detailed technical discussions, and we can't do that. So like Loral, we would like to see it move back into commerce, and we think that's the right move.
Do you have any hopes in that regard? We've got a report coming out today, for example, which they telegraphed about a year ago, which indicated that the Pentagon would be okay with a lot of components moving back over. Are you hopeful going forward? Because we've been talking about this for 10 years, as you know.
Yeah, we would like to see the details, but from what we're hearing, it's probably a step in the right direction.
Thanks.
We agree. I mean, we keep hearing about it, and frankly, to a large extent, we watch the news and then we ignore it. Because when it happens, it's going to happen, and until then, we've got to live with it. So,
what are another question from the audience, what are the challenges for traditional government/military programs to adopt commercial best practices? Let's start with you on that one, Mark, because you've got this big GPS program and you referenced.
Yeah, I think there's some really good things that have gone on in just the last year. And I'll pick three of our programs: Advanced EHF, SBIRS, and GPS, all with SMC. General Polakowski last fall commissioned 3 teams. As we moved from development into production, she commissioned 3 teams: a technical requirements team, a program operating team or governance, and a terms and conditions team. Those teams were made up with contractor plus customer personnel to really go off and drive efficiencies and drive costs out of our systems. And we came up with substantial savings when we did that across those 3 programs. It was simple things like removing approvals, removing numbers of meetings, reduction in reports, reductions in procedures. One of our programs going from 126 to 26 procedurals, reducing cycle time, taking a look at test requirements. Do we do 14 cycles or 10 cycles on components, removing acoustics testing from a follow-on vehicle because we're basically, past all the development, past, some of the validation, verification of requirements, and really substantial savings by doing that. Now, when we had the discussion, it was because we're moving to fixed price. in those vehicles. You know, it was really uncomfortable for both sides because we're asking folks to go into a different world that they really have never worked in before. So it's, you know, it was an interesting, I think sometimes more social engineering than the technical part. It was really interesting to have those discussions, and we've gotten full agreement to move forward with that. Now we have to get through the, you know, it has to be in the RFP, and we have to get through negotiations to make it real, but we're in the process of doing that. Advanced CHF is first, then SIBRs, and, you know, GPS will keep on going. So I think really encouraging, you know, working with the Air Force in last fall, very successful.
Craig, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, we went through this last year with WGS, and probably the biggest thing was the cultural issue. For so long, we've been used to managing that program a certain way with a certain government approval rights, a certain amount of testing. What we saw, though, were some big opportunities out there. There's pretty stark comparisons between how we do a commercial program and how we did WGS at that time. And what we found out working with the Air Force, the best thing for us to do is just get the data on the table. We can do a side-by-side comparison of a 702 high-powered commercial program with how we manage and work the 702 high-powered WGS program. We can look at the mission availability, which is basically the same, but we can look at the approval rights, the amount of CDRLs, the amount of implant presence, and you can see the contrast. And when some of those things can be eliminated because you've already proven that satellite as you've gone from development into production, then the government has an opportunity to lower the cost. And that's exactly what they did with WGS.
Now, for companies like Ball Aerospace, Northrop Grumman, which don't have huge commercial portfolios, how do you bring in these commercial best practices that companies like Loral use as a matter of course? How do you bring these in? How do you learn them, and then how do you apply them to the government programs? Let's start with you, Fred. If we could.
It's a little bit different for us, and while we don't have a large product line of commercial, that's actually where we started on the space side with the satellite buses. And so we have been doing fixed price contracting for the past 15 years. We do have what we consider commercial best practices in how we do that. We've done that commercially with Digital Globe. We've done some of those with NASA. And now we're leveraging that into the national security space community. And where they're looking for those affordable solutions, we think we've been demonstrating that. We've worked with 3 out of the 4 panelists here again on those types of systems in the past. But as you look forward on the Air Force, that they've been very vocal about where they're going. Some of the affordability we've been demonstrating over the past decade is what they're looking for in some of their future architectures, which we're pretty confident that we can bring that solution to them.
Does Northrop have an approach that you take?
Yeah, Warren, my thoughts on this would be that you know, industry has dabbled on occasion with best commercial practices when there have been large non-recurring large amounts of non-recurring in the program, and I don't think that served us well. Where you've done significant development or had significant technology risk in a program that they were trying to apply commercial practices, which probably are better applied to production runs where you have minimal non-recurring. And we have programs, like Mark was saying, on Advanced CHF. We're moving into a production phase in that program now, and it's appropriate that we all take the steps to treat it like, I'll call it best commercial practices, where we're building and testing, not like the first one was built and tested, but in fact, like the 5th and 6th. So I see our industry maintaining a foot in both camps, where we are in a production phase in some of our programs, but still have large non-recurring programs, which I don't think best commercial practices necessarily lend themselves to.
Does, David, does the government's apparent increasing receptiveness to commercial practices, how does that bode for Loral's ambitions in the government markets?
I think it bodes well for us. We've proven over the years that we know how to do it. A couple of years ago, there was a study that the NRO and Aerospace undertook to look at on-orbit reliability and on-orbit performance of commercial satellites versus the government programs, and they found no difference in the data, which kind of substantiates what we at Loral have been saying for a number of years, that we've got processes in place to provide a high-quality product. Our customers demand quality also. We've got customers out there who are providing commercial service, and the consumer market is pretty unforgiving, just as the government market is. So, you know, overall, I think it all works well, and I think the government is becoming very receptive to it because they've finally started digging in and looking at the data and the results of what's been doing by looking at what's going on orbit and seeing that, in fact, it does work.
Thanks. I'm afraid that's going to have to be the last word because we've run out of time. I'd like you all to join me in thanking the panelists and giving them a round of applause. We've got the satellite operators coming up next in about 5 minutes, so stick around. Thanks.